So happy to have the opportunity to meet and speak with Benjamin Sears. And Benjamin, thank you so much for joining me today here on my podcast.
It's a pleasure. Thanks for inviting me. I think maybe you can send me some of that Florida warmth because the reason I was 2 minutes late is it's minus about 30 here in Montana right now.
Oh
Yeah, and
my
I
gosh.
had a little issue with the minor issue with the boiler, just like a setting that had to switch.
Oh my gosh.
So yeah, I was running around trying to. My mom's here visiting. I was trying to make sure my 83-year-old mom doesn't freeze.
Yeah, good idea. I watched some weather this morning and I saw they were saying things like, 30 to 50 below, like way, up in the northern states. And
Yeah,
I
it's
don't know
pretty
what
real.
50 below what that feels like. I've never been in that
It
kind of,
feels like don't go outside.
yeah, don't even
Yeah,
chance it.
yeah.
Could you frostbite? Like how long would it take in that kind of weather?
I,
Like,
I don't know the technical details, but I know that it's not a pleasant sensation. I mean, like as
yeah.
cold as it gets, I'll still like go outside for like maybe a little walk or walk over to the garage or, check the solar panel heating system, make sure that's working. But there was the one thing I didn't do this morning that I should have maybe done is I have solar panels over the detached garage and I could have gone out there and cleaned them off, but it involves like a ladder and a brush. And I was just like, no, man, I'm not doing that
No
shit right
way.
now. Yeah.
Well, I'll definitely try to share some Florida sunshine with you.
Appreciate that.
I'm excited to speak with you. You've been at the yoga, you've been practicing yoga for years now, and I really have been enjoying checking out the information you have on your Instagram page, your YouTube channel, and your
Thanks.
website, of which all those links are below. People can click and follow you and see what you're up to. But can you give me some insight into what inspired you to find yoga and or what was your introduction to yoga?
So yeah, it's interesting. I was thinking about this before we talked because I, for so many years, did these like long lectures when I would travel and do workshops, and part of it would be like my background in history, and I've really like sort of um, veered away from that, and the workshops are all much more condensed now and whatnot. And I was like, oh, he's probably going to ask me about my history in yoga, so I should remember how it all started. So yeah, so I mean, we can track way back to kind of like high school years. At that point, I was just that kid who was interested in esoteric ideas, like reading Siddhartha because I was curious, or like, that kind of stuff. Doing like meditations that I invented on like Jewish holidays. My family was like it's sort of barely religious Jewish. So sometimes we would observe the holidays and you know, I found myself doing like meditations by mistake, and I ski raced when I was a kid, and I think this is probably my first experience of like conscious meditation where I would on the chairlift on the way up, I remember being quite anxious and also cold. And I started doing this thing where I would visualize a candle flame at my third eye. I didn't know what a third eye was or any of that kind of thing, right? And
Yeah.
I just was like doing it on the chairlift, and it mellowed me out and made me feel good. And then, like fast forward, what must have been 20 plus years, and I'm teaching Tritaka meditation to my teacher trainees as a, end of the day
Nice.
thing, because I think it's a really great tool for unwinding, and tends to make people sleepy, like in a good way. So yeah, so that was sort of like those were like little embers maybe of motivation for something that I didn't know what it was that I was looking for. And then when I was, sort of college age, I'd always been really into sports, and I got into weightlifting and weight training, to support those endeavors. And I have this congenital issue in my lower back called spondylolisthesis, where my like lower back is kind of jammed forward over my pelvis. So it just makes it really easy to have back issues. There's a lot of people that live with spondylolisthesis and are fine and like never even uncover it, but I think it was a combination of the sports I was doing and the way that I was training. I am actually a proponent of weight training, but the way that I was weight training at that time was not productive for my frame. And it was just putting, I think, more and more pressure on that one hinge point. And so, I'm in college and I look fit and ripped and all that stuff, but I was in pain a lot. And then got in a car accident. And then from that point, it was just like, anytime I tried to do anything, my back would go quote unquote out, and I would just be like useless. And it was a big irony because here I am, you know, maybe 21 years old and, 10 pack abs and all that stuff, but just unfunctional completely. And so that was really what, certain doctors were considering like like a disc surgery, and then enough people told me, well, like, you got to try yoga. And that was what pushed me into yoga. Just started sort of like sampling different things. I happened to have a friend of a friend who was older than I was, who ran a small studio in Los Angeles where I was living at the time. That was they taught Kundalini yoga and Pilates. It was like a cool mix, and I started working with him. And then I just like was looking on the internet, and I one day showed up to hot yoga class at the Bikram's Yoga College of India, which was like this kind of creepy looking place off the 10 freeway that I had driven by like 100 times and be like, that looks weird. I'm never going in there, you know? And then I go in there and I'm in like sweatpants and a hoodie and, thinking I'm going to yoga and or whatever, and then and then that really, that did something for me. Like the Kundalini practices were great, and that I was doing because I was going to Kundalini Yoga West in LA. They just weren't blunt enough of a sort of object or heavy mallet for the back stuff that I was dealing with at that time. Maybe if I was more patient, like sometimes I wonder if I had just stuck with that, like would I have just ended up fixed anyway and just on a slightly different path, So that
Good
was
point.
how it happened, and then I got really into over, it took a little while, but I got really into that hot yoga practice. It really helped my back and my knees initially. We can talk more about what happened later. And then as I was getting really deep into the practice for those physical reasons, I was also noticing some mental shifts, towards more consciousness of my behavior and inner monologues. And then some really tragic shit happened, and it at that point it was like, okay, I need yoga to feel okay. That's how it happened.
Epic answer. I have so many questions off of what you
Yeah,
just
go
said,
for it.
and I'm so thankful to have this chance to speak with you because I just this last year uh gained insight into that I have spondylolisthesis as well.
Mm,
And so just to hear, I can't wait. I just have so many questions for you about your journey with this because man, like you said, the back pain and it's so intense. And then,
it's
uh,
debilitating.
yeah, and so I've been relearning everything based off of
Yeah,
this information now. So there's a lot there. My second avenue I got to ask you right away, though, was the Bikram studio that you went to, the one on La Cienega Boulevard, or was,
yeah, with the
yeah,
big blue sign and the parking
yeah.
lot, and yeah,
I
yeah,
did teacher training with Bikram in 2001 at that studio, and
amazing. Yeah,
that
so
was
I was a
good.
couple years after you. I was in 2006 in the same
Gotcha.
space for the teacher training. Yeah.
Yeah, that was so intense, right? I mean, I'm
Oh
sure
my
we could,
God.
I have so many questions for you there as well. And
Yeah, it's like another. It's
oh,
like a parallel universe we briefly entered at back in
yeah.
those days.
Well, actually, I have a great question for you, or I have a question for you right now. A great question. I have a question for you. Um, so when I was doing Bikram with back then, I remember, we'd be in the room, we'd be in camel pose, and there's
Yeah,
300 people in the room, hotter
yeah,
than hotter than I don't even know if we could describe how hot for people to understand like how incredibly hot it was. But
yeah.
and then Bikram going push and push and push and push and push and
Hmm.
push and push. So I'm
Yeah.
in camel and I'm pushing my hips forward, and then that was even then back in 2001, I'd come out and be like, oh, my back, like what did I do to my back?
Yeah.
And I was
Yeah.
completely unaware, and I don't even know when
Mm,
my spondylolisthesis happened. I had a really bad fall when I was a kid out of a rope swing,
mm.
20 feet down into 2 inches of water on my back. So that probably could have been, or maybe I was born with some sort of genetic thing. I don't
Yeah.
know.
Yeah.
But it wasn't until like, now 20 something years later where it got so bad that now I'm realizing, wow, is back bending really good for me? So that's where I have to ask you right
Mm.
away. What has been your journey with backbending based on the fact that if that L5 or 4 is pushed forward every time we backbend, then our spine is processed potentially is
Mm,
compressing the spinal cord. What has been your experience?
compressing excessively.
Yeah,
Yeah, I mean, I think that, everything, the answer to every such question is contextual, and this is why I think that, Bikram yoga or whatever it's called now is a wonderful beginner's practice. And some people will understand that and understand that I'm complimenting the practice, and some people will feel insulted and they'll have to reconcile that themselves. What I mean by that is it's very broad strokes. The instructions are very general. They're geared towards people that have limited awareness of their bodies and are just kind of getting moving. And I think that that's uh, could you sorry, could you hold 1 second? There's just a noise to my side that I need
no
to
worries.
stop.
No worries.
Okay, it stopped. I just like totally,
I know what you
lost my
like.
lost my focus.
How can
Um,
yeah,
so
good
yeah,
point.
so the practice is one of the reasons it's impactful is because it is so blunt and it is so broad, right? Like it's very hot. The instructions are very simple. Everybody's doing the same thing, and that's powerful and impactful. And one of the wonderful things about the practice, so it doesn't mean that those things are inherently negative, but it does mean that they're inherently limiting, right? So um, I think that within the question of backbending, pretty soon after one begins practice, it's useful to develop some awareness of like nuance and what's appropriate for the individual to, progress and maintain health and practice sustainably. And so, like there are people that'll say things like, "All backbending heals the spine," and these overgeneralizations are sort of like inflammatory comments, whether they're positive or negative, get a lot of attention and they're quotable. And so they're easy to attach to because they don't require an individual to do a lot of critical thinking. And we're all sort of, it's easy as a human being to lean into something that makes you feel like that's the one answer and you don't have to uh, delve too deep into the particularities that might apply to you. And so, yeah, backbending is great, man. Like I love to backbend. It feels amazing. Do I backbend now the same way that I did when I was thought that I would be enlightened if I could just get my toes to touch my head? Like, no way. My practice has changed a lot. And I think that's a normal arc for a lot of people. And also, I think that each individual has the autonomy to prioritize what they want to prioritize in their own practice. And through all of these endeavors that we choose to chase in practice, we get the opportunity for insight and information. So, some of the data that you got right back then was like, maybe this isn't good for me, but it's very hard when you're in a scenario where the energy is so intense. There's 300 people and there's this very charismatic and inspiring guy, those are his good qualities, right? um like motivating you to just keep doing it harder and more. And that, if I think that's in the simplest way the biggest gripe I have with that practice is that, like, if it's not working, just do it harder. And I'm all for effort. Like, you got to make effort to find grace, but you have to mediate effort with skill, right? So in order to really get somewhere that you want to go, not just get somewhere, but get somewhere you want to go. And progress isn't linear. It's not straight ahead. When something hurts, it's like a sign on the side of the road that says, "Hey, like, pull over here and let's check your tires." So yeah, I think that there's a lot that can be said about backbending, and I think that also there are individual genetic realities that people want to ignore because yoga is supposed to be for everybody. But the fact that not everybody's going to be a contortionist doesn't mean that yoga isn't for everybody, right? It's like, it's still, when it's played like a sport, it's a sport, man. Like people who play basketball and get to a high level have either a lot of height or a great vertical leap or some particular skill. And so it's okay that bodies express poses differently, but I do feel that all bodies can use the same fundamentals of technique. And so the backbending, the more you do something, think of it this way: the more you do something, the better your technique needs to be, because the more volume that you engage in, the more revelations you're going to have. And the revelations are not always pleasant. Like people think of revelations as like, oh my God, this sky opens and everything is shining bright and everything is beautiful. But a revelation, it means that you come around to an understanding,
Yes.
right? And so you might come around to an understanding that the way that I'm doing this ain't so good for me anymore. Um,
Yes.
so
Oh man. Well said. Well said.
yeah. And I
Oh my
think,
God.
one of the problems with these practices is not so much the practice itself, it's how the practice is used and how the practice is sold.
Mm,
It's like there's
mm,
nothing wrong with 26 and 2 hot yoga. There is something wrong with telling people it's the only thing they ever need to do for the rest of their lives,
mm.
you know?
There was some
Because it's like,
serious.
are you getting better? Are you getting better at your practice or are you getting better at yourself? And every practice has holes. Every practice has blind spots, right? When you want to call it lineage or style or brand, there's blind spots everywhere. So, a practice, I think of practice now from the perspective of minimum effective dose. Like, how much of something do I need to maintain it to the level that I want to maintain it? If I'm just talking purely like physical capacity. So that's an interesting thing with backbending, right? Because there was a phase, we all went through this, you probably did too,
Mm,
right? Whereas like every day hot yoga class and then a bunch of backbends afterwards and all that kind of thing. And that was what we thought we needed at that time. Right. And now I'm a little more conscious of what I need and why. So yeah, I want to maintain a back bend. I want to be able to do a wheel and I want to be able to transition in and out of wheel into other floor-based movements because that's where my passion is now. I like to roll around on the floor and go into a wheel and transition off my elbow and that kind of thing. So I need enough of a back bend to do that, but I personally have decided that that's as much as I need. And then I also know that back bends break habits, right? So like they get you out of a slump. So a backbending practice is a great thing to do if you're like, man, I got to lift my spirits.
yes.
Um,
Yes.
yeah.
Oh man. Well, what about in terms of actual muscle engagement? One thing that I've started to do is, just I've had to, one of my most favorite things to do is drop back and walk my
Mm,
hand toward my heels and, maybe have
yeah.
someone pull me in and catch. And now
Yeah.
I've pulled way, way back just to bridge and just
Yeah.
on my shoulders, trying to lift hips, adduct the thigh,
Yeah.
and not compress at L5S1 as much as possible and bend everywhere
Yeah.
else, but not there. What type of technique and or could you explain some of the nuance of the technique you might employ when you're
Yeah.
working
Yeah.
in?
I mean, I'll do my best to articulate it verbally.
Okay. Yeah.
First of all, like, I'd never have caught my ankles. So how'd that feel? It might have just been painful or it might have been exciting. I don't know.
Great question. It used to be really fun, and then I remember one time I had my teacher Tim Miller. He pulled me in when I was down in Miami,
Mm,
and then I couldn't walk after. I went to the hotel
mm,
I was staying in, and no, it was miserable, and that was like the beginning sign of like, and is what I'm doing actually good for me? And like that
yeah.
question that you start popping up of like you just
Yeah.
initially like what you're talking about, where there's this thought of like all yoga is gonna be good no matter what, as
Hmm.
much as you can do, more and more and more. And I don't know
Yeah.
where that comes from, if that's like our American culture, if that's like like if we grew up with some sort of trauma or
Mm,
where that stems from. But yeah, I like the fact that you use the word revelation. That is a great way to sum up that turning point where
what?
the virtue, more growth comes about.
Sure. And I think this motivation to do more that doesn't get us anywhere transcends as an individual culture. And I think that it's a representation of just the sweet weakness of the human desire to please our own egos or somebody else. And if
Mm,
you look at life outside of yoga, we're all doing things that we have to learn from, whether they're in relationships or in work scenarios where there comes a time where you have to assess if what you're doing is still not just productive, but sustainable, nourishing, really filling you up in the way that you want to be filled.
mm,
It's like
good point.
it's almost like choosing what you're eating. People reference a lot like the information economy and organizing your attention, and it's the same in a practice or in something that I'm always trying to recalibrate towards is sensing in my practice and working on details that I can acknowledge through feeling, like through my neurology, and say, like if I'm working on my handstand practice, I'm working on one simple thing. Like my teacher's like, feel your kneecaps, when I'm trying to transition to my baby beginning of one arm handstand work that I'm doing, right? And so, okay, I feel that sensation. And then what are the other experiences that are offshoots of doing those engagements? And then things that are not guided by feeling, like organizing myself based on angles. And then what is the sensory feedback of that? And how does it feel? And what does it tell me? So, um, I think that the, the power of these things is, okay, how does the physical practice relate in a way that is bigger than the physical practice? And how do those behaviors connect? And how do those patterns connect? And what can I learn about myself through this, gauntlet that I keep putting myself through that isn't productive, right?
Yes.
And right, so it's like, why are we doing this? Like, or to feel good? Well, maybe to feel good, to get insight also, and just to keep going and stay interested in the infinite game of being a human and revealing yourself to yourself. Um,
Yes.
and I think there's something else really important here too that I want to point out, which is uh practice is what can it's problematic when the way that practice makes us feel that we're being ourselves becomes the only way that we can be ourselves, right? It's like, if I don't do this thing, I can't operate. If I don't do these poses, I'm not going to feel okay about myself. So then it's like,
Mm,
the it's like, now
that's a
you
good point.
only have you only have one coat you can wear,
Good point.
but you know
Good point. Good point. And I'm gathering you do feel a desire to be able to wear multiple change that coat
Yeah, I mean,
when necessary. Yeah. Yeah.
one of the most powerful things you can do in life is accept the circumstances and reorganize,
Hmm.
which is different than like lacking the discipline to stick with something. But sometimes in order to stick with something, you have to change the way that you're doing it, or you have to, you got to plan better.
Yes.
I'm dealing with that
Yeah.
right now with this retreat center project that I'm working on in Montana. It's like, man, I got punched in the face, a few months ago, getting denied permits and whatnot.
Mm,
And so, that was, it came right out of my blind spot of thinking that I'm doing good work, and people like me, and why wouldn't anybody want this, right? But I mean, that's the beauty of a revelation, because I came around, right? So like, I like the closeness of the word revolve and the word revelation, right? Because I feel like you have to go through a revolution to get to a revelation, because you got to come all the way around to see somebody else's point of view, or you got to come all the way around to see how what you thought was so crucial and important and essential to your identity is no longer that. For example, catching your ankles in a backbend, which was this thing that was so important to you, and you worked so hard to do it, and then you did it, and you're like, well, why am I doing this? It hurts, right?
especially if it hurt.
So
Yeah. Yeah.
yeah, and
Yeah.
some things that are good for us will hurt, but but it's like, how do you respond to the hurt in a way that recognizes that you're evolving and developing? And sometimes the answer is to simply sit with it.
Yes. Yes.
You know,
Yes.
the pose ain't gonna, like, we get that pose and then I'll be happy. I get that person, then I'll be happy. I'll get this money, then I'll be happy. And of course, like, we got to take care of our primitive needs. You need enough money, right? You need a place to sleep and food to eat, and you want to be able to do the things you want to do. But um, it's interesting how the practice is very. It's like, there's like a devil and an angel, right?
Yes. I was thinking about this just the
Yeah,
other day.
yeah.
Yeah.
Um,
Look over on this side, look over on that
I mean,
side.
you asked me about
Yeah.
backbending technique. You want me to try to talk about that?
I do. Well, first what I
Okay.
really just enjoyed about listening what you said is like when I watch some of the footage that you have available for us to check out,
Hmm.
obviously, well, to me, it seems obvious that you have a very technical ability with your movement ability.
Mm,
So it's fascinating to me to hear the intellect involved in the technique, the technical, like,
mm,
because sometimes, when we look at this really incredible expression of physical movement and or yoga, and it looks so challenging, like beyond what we could potentially do. And then
mm.
obviously we can work on it and perfect it and gain some skill. But it's really cool to hear your sort of intellect behind the technique and the technical. So yes, I really would like to hear some technical ideas around stabilizing
Yeah.
amongst chaos.
Yeah, I mean, I really appreciate what you said. It's very kind of you. It's kind of you to tell me that I'm good at the physical part because I don't feel like I am, which is something that I have been working on throughout my whole,
Wow.
you know, practice. It's
Yeah.
very second nature to me. Like I don't feel like I have a body that was built for flexibility or yoga or anything like that. And there's been long phases where I'm practicing with people that are just like, man, like it's like what circus planet did I land on right now? So I've had to really learn to moderate my expectations around my practice and find other things that fill me up, and excite me and make me feel good the way that I thought that certain yoga postures would, and so for me that's shifted, and I think that's where having some diversity in one's practice can be so powerful, so that you always get the dopamine hit of feeling like you check the box of doing a practice. But now, it's like some days my practice is a standing sort of qigong type of practice where like I'm standing in one position and moving my arms, and I'm doing that for 30 minutes, and it's a movement quality practice, and I'm not saying it's better or worse than yoga or whatever. So I'm just saying, like, for me, and this is individual for everybody, right? Like, you know, um, so I think that just recognizing that you have the autonomy to choose, but within the autonomy to choose is the uh, downside of being spread too thin and not getting anywhere. And so that's the magic of the discipline of some of these classical practices. Like you mentioned, you practice Ashtanga, where it's like, okay, you have to do it this many days a week, and you only rest on this day, and you show up at exactly this time. I mean, that's magic. That's practical magic that gives you a power. Um, and so, how do you balance those things? You
Good
know,
point. Well said.
and I think the piece that you pointed out about like the way that I think about this stuff, and for me that really connects to the like technical awareness, because I'm a thinker, so I like to think through things, and I like to look at how they happen, and I see really well, and those are really my skills much more than physical practice. It's like if physical practice has given me anything, it's given me the ability to teach better. And I think that the fact that a lot of this stuff is second nature for me, it doesn't come easily, and I beat my head against the wall in my physical practice all the time. I think it gives me more compassion for other people, and it gives me more tools to help other people. So that's the upside of being on the long road to minimal progress in a physical practice.
Long
um,
road to minimal progress. I
yeah. Um,
like it.
so
Yeah.
yeah, yeah. And then as far as the backbending thing goes, I mean, I'll just give you a few ideas that I think about, or that I work on. So one thing that I think, anyone dealing with like back injury and back pain, I think something that's crucial that doesn't really happen in a yoga context is working on movement that is more fluid, like spinal wave type movements. I think can be really useful, and also a great small dose tool to have at your disposal when you just need like a movement snack. I think it brings awareness into the different segments of the spine. And if what we're really trying to do with back bending and movement is just like move the bones around so that the synovial fluid gets excited and stays healthy, you don't need to go super deep just to be healthy, right? Like that's a miscommunication I think that exists a lot in yoga. That is like, well, the deeper you go, the healthier you are, and that's not necessarily true. It's like how much do you need? That's an important question to ask. So that's one thing. And then the other thing, so that's like a movement perspective. And then I think there's a mobility perspective. And I look at movement and mobility as different. These are definitions that I use. Movement is more global. right? Like the whole spine is moving. And then mobility is like segmented movement of the spine, for example, where you're trying to um, move each piece as independently as possible, because the more that each piece moves well, the more that the whole concert plays in tune. Um, so oftentimes, I mean, really what injury is when load exceeds capacity. So like, for example, a low back injury just means that like that area is getting hit too hard. It's like it keeps getting hit and the other pieces aren't playing along. And eventually it's just like, yo, man, that's enough. Like I can't take anymore. So now I'm going to send you this pain signal to tell you that you're putting too much pressure on me. So, I think about distributing the back bend more evenly throughout the spine, which might mean minimizing the overall expression, the global expression of the pose. So I look at like, you know, um, I think it's important if someone wants to develop their back bend and they want to do it in a sustainable way. I mean, you got to work a lot on the front of your hips. Learn how to engage your glutes to drive your hips so that you can make that space. I think for a long time in yoga, muscle got a bad name, right? It's like, oh, because it's don't no tension, don't make any tension, and it's like it's impossible to not have tension in your body if you're doing exercises. Yoga asanas are exercises, right? So it's like instead, let's put intention in our tension so that you move bones in a way that will create space. And so hips, shoulders, and shoulders doesn't just mean stretching them. It's like developing awareness of how to create space in the joint through isolated internal rotation work and then working on external rotation so that you have like when I go into a wheel now, right? Like let's say I'm pushing up from the floor, I'm thinking a lot about the co-contraction of the entire backside of my body and like pulling my hands and feet towards each other so that so as I pull inwards with those end points, that the center of the pose can expand and express itself more evenly. And then a lot of this understanding and awareness is not going to come from doing a wheel if a wheel is hard for you, right? It's like you got to make the problem smaller. So it's like someone might need to put their feet up on a chair, on some blocks, or on a sofa and do a elevated wheel, which is like, oh, that's what it feels like to get into my upper back and shoulders. So I think breaking things down, making them smaller so that you can hit each piece, and then you kind of optimize each piece and then put the puzzle back together, and I think that really helps.
Great points. Those are
Yeah.
awesome, man. Do you have more for me? That's good. I'm following you all the way
I
through.
mean, yeah. And then, okay. So then,
Yeah.
you know, um,
I really
I mean,
appreciate all that. Yeah, yeah.
another big one in backbending is how you move your head
Mm.
to feel into the upper spine more. So I think that people get stuck in kind of two camps. One is like, bring your head all the way back right away and look all the way back, and that'll move your whole spine. Doesn't really work like that. And then there's another camp that's like, oh, be careful of your neck, right? And I usually end up in the middle, right, of all of these sort of like endpoint dogmas. And so I have developed this little terminology that I think is really cute, and I call it the head to heart loop. So what it means is like you imagine that there's a circle from the front of your spiritual heart to your third eye, out the back of your head and into the back of your heart. It's a circle. And I think about moving my head along that circle. So when I start a back bend, the first thing I do is glide my chin backwards and then start to reach my head up. And that immediately gives you this like mid back activation.
Mm.
And it's a nice way to work into that area without having to go into like a crazy deep posture. So that's one thing that I think is, really helpful.
That's that is good.
Yeah,
I like that.
yeah.
I'm excited.
Um, and then
Yeah.
and then different ways to use your hips and your low back muscles at the same time. I always think about a joint moving in two directions, but really being center. So it's like um, options with shoulders depending on the type of shoulder structure that someone has. Someone who has very bendy shoulders and is looking to access more of the upper spine might want to shut down some of the shoulder range by externally rotating on purpose. Someone like me, who's tighter in the shoulders and has a lot of thick back muscle, I am actually now, when I go into a wheel, um, I pull my shoulder blades back and together, and I let my elbows open out to the sides
Mm.
as I go up, and then I get this sort of like like
Mm.
almost like opening a can effect, that allows me to pull my chest through. So it's for me, it's like the scapulae go back and up. But for, a long time in yoga, it was almost like, religion that you had to uh what people were calling wrap the shoulders, or like externally rotate the upper arm, and for people who are tighter, that's just going to put more pressure on the low back and be too limiting. So again, context matters.
Good point. I like the fact that you're looking at things from the big picture and attempting to solve puzzle problems by examining it and then
Yeah.
coming up through intelligence versus, like you said, the blind dogma ideas.
Hmm.
What are some other teachers? Because obviously, I remember in the Bikram world thinking there's got to be more to yoga than this, and then I started moving
Hmm.
out. What was your trajectory with other teachings and
Other
teachers?
practices.
Yeah.
Yeah, so I started with that Kundalini thing, which was wild. I was like a, partying 20-year-old going to like Kundalini class. It was like I didn't even look at the schedule. I would just show up. And I realized that the class that I was attending most frequently was the one that was like Kundalini yoga philosophy and lecture, which was quite funny. Because I was usually like in there, I was would be not unlikely that I was in there like hungover after like a night out, and then I found the Bikram thing. And then the next practice that I dove into pretty deep was Dharma Mitra yoga in New York City. So I spent a lot of time, have a lot of really wonderful memories of, a core group of friends that would all be there together practicing every day at noon in his master class. And that was very devotional. It felt like we were really part of something special. And we were, because anytime you're connecting with a group of humans, um, and you have that sense of community is very special. And I think that's one of the most important elements of practice. There's obviously a solitary nature to practice. Eventually we're all alone. But at the same point, one of the powers of practice is the way that it brings people together. And I think that's something that people, always have needed, and we still really need today. And as I've gotten older and my practice has changed, and my events now, whether they're retreats or trainings or whatnot, like it's really as much about just like having a good time with a group of people for a while as it is about making sure that they learn every detail. Um, so yeah, so that was that, and then I found Forrest Yoga with Anna Forrest, and I
Yeah.
did a couple of her teacher trainings, and
Nice.
that was also very powerful. All these practices are different, and all of them think that they're the only way to do it. And there's magic in each one. There really is. And as I was sort of doing a lot of Forest Yoga, I found Katona Yoga developed by Naveen Mishan, and I spent a lot of time with also with Abby Galvin, who is you know I don't know exactly how I would phrase it, but Naveen developed the stuff, and Abby's sort of like the other longest standing teacher of the thing, who's very well informed and incredible. And so I spent a lot of time with them, and
Where was that?
and then from there develop my own thing. And I'd
Yeah.
say if there's any yoga teacher that I'm still connected to at this point, who I'd look at as a mentor, it's Naveen. I'm lucky enough to I FaceTime her from time to time, and we just talk about stuff, and I get to hear her wisdom. And um yeah, so that's, as far as yoga goes, that's the trajectory. There's been a lot of other stuff in there in, the movement world and whatnot. Throughout that time, I spent some time, like a brief period, with the sort of Ido Portal world. And then I'm still kind of peripherally connected to that through a studio in Dallas, and a guy that called Brian, who gives me programming. And yeah,
I'm
that's
unfamiliar. I'm unfamiliar with that. Can you say that one again? That particular style of
E-
movement?
uh, yeah, Ido Portal is this brilliant Israeli movements guy who's basically done everything and has devoted his life to it. And um, they have a whole system of one-on-one programming that they offer in events and workshops and things like that. And it's constantly evolving. I have a lot of respect for the guy. He's a thinker, a mover and a thinker, and he uses movement as delivery system for thought. You'd be hard pressed to find anyone in the world who's spent more time honing his craft, which is many crafts. The irony of it is that I actually got kicked out of Ido Portal movement world, which is another funny story. Um,
Can you share it?
but, yeah, I mean, it's not that big of a deal. I think he's mellowed out a lot since then, but I had been to his movement camp and there was this online community, and Ito's not a huge fan of yoga. I think he's mellowed on his stance a lot, and I actually understand his perspective, and I think it's valid. You know, the perspective was sort of that like yoga is an inferior method of developing movement capacity, and I agree. I don't think yoga develops coordination. You know, you can't compare a yogi to like a high level dancer or uh, martial artist or anything like that from the perspective of how they move, because yoga is mostly static postures. And I understand there's vinyasas and transitions, but it's so contained that the just the level of ability is not is it can't be compared. It doesn't mean yoga's bad, right? So I understand his perspective there. And I think at the time he was very vehement about that. And so in this movement culture group, there was a guy who posted he posted a picture of a yoga mat and he had drawn some like little squigglies on it. And he had taken a workshop with one of Ito's colleagues, who's this amazing woman called Shai Faran that I had the opportunity to practice with a few times. She's a modern dancer, Israeli modern dancer. And he wrote in his little caption, he said, "Oh, this is a reminder that my practice is not only linear on my yoga mat, but can expand far beyond this, 2 foot by 6 foot space." And it was actually quite a nice post. And Ito jumped on there and just kind of shit on the guy about yoga. And and I made the mistake of sort of defending yoga as a delivery system to Ito for many students. And then we kind of got into it, and I said some things I shouldn't have said, and I regret the whole thing now because arguing with anyone on the internet, especially someone you respect, and I was in his house, I'm in his movement community thing, so it's just like I'm good at words, and I went a step too far, and I regret that. I do think some of my points were valid, but at that point I was, excommunicated, and I think it's a great lesson, honestly, because it's really about like, is this the right time to say these things, and is this the right forum, and how's it going to play long term? Like, what did it do for me to make that argument? Like, nothing, and it's not like it was an argument where like I'm defending the rights of some underserved community or person, or fighting for justice in any way that really matters. Like, I'm arguing about fucking yoga on the internet. Like, what could be a worse way to spend your time? So yeah, so I learned from that experience, and then I do still train sort of, like I said, peripheral to that method with someone, an old longtime friend of mine in Dallas who has this great studio. And so, I don't know, imagine Ito will ever hear this podcast, but he does. Sorry I said those things. Think you're great. And you know,
Very cool. Yeah.
peace be unto you.
Yeah. I hear you. I appreciate you sharing that story. Thank you so much. I like
Yeah.
hearing some of the ins and outs of the challenges that we face if you're in the yoga community for a long time, and
Mm,
that's fascinating. What other So now you mentioned that you have your own style. So like say if I were to come to one of your teacher trainings,
yeah.
what are the main things that you feel are essential to convey to your students? I want to back way up when you mentioned Trataka meditation. I just want to make sure the
Mm,
listeners know what that is. Can you just, I know it's maybe
yeah.
everybody knows what that is, but I'm curious, can you just explain that one a little bit so
Yeah,
people?
basically the simplest way to describe it is you stare at a candle flame for as long as you can keep your eyes open, and then you close your eyes and you just remain with your eyes closed until you lose the image of the candle flame, or your mind starts to wander, and then you open your eyes again and you
Mm,
just do it for a while, and it's great. It's like super simple, trains the eyes. It's I think it's a nice balance for the eyes with all the screen time that we have nowadays. And because it's a concentration practice, it fades the exterior. And so I think it's a nice one. I find it's really nice at night. I have a funny story from my Ayurveda teacher, who I no longer work with, but I learned a lot from him. And he's a Australian and Swedish guy who grew up in India, on an ashram like since he was a little kid, and then came to the U.S. and he helped me a lot along the way. And he said that when his family was living in India, his mother got a lot of she's very unusual looking person in that context, and she got a lot of unwanted attention. And he said that their teacher taught her to do Tritaka and said that it would make her eyes so powerful that she could make people move away from her with a glance.
Wow,
And apparently it worked, according to him. She started walking around just giving people the evil eye, and they would leave her alone. So I think that's pretty cool.
that is cool.
Um,
That is cool.
yeah. So
Nice.
that's anecdotal. I don't know how it actually played, but I do like that Tritaka meditation. My meditations now, I do a few different things, but mostly it's very simple. As time is scarce and meditation remains essential, I've really found that what I need most and what's most important for me is just to sit. So it's kind of a simple mindfulness practice. I just need to sit. There's so I think practice can become tricky in that it's easy to reach for another technique, and while developing technique gives us more options, um, the ultimate option is to sit quietly and feel things, right? Because it's like, you know, you go through different things in life. Some of them are quite sad. And I could sit down and magic square myself for an hour and I would feel good, right? And it would change my state. But I don't know, man. I might need to sit and observe my feelings without following each one down its, potential trajectory. That to me feels really impactful at this point.
Good point. Did you get a chance to practice some meditation today?
Well, so I was planning on it actually, but instead, I was working on the boiler. So that was my meditation. My meditation was actually to just mellow out from the frustration I felt about the fact that what happened was actually so my mom's here visiting, which is really cute, and we went into town last night to have dinner with some friends, and it's very cold here right now, like I said, and I usually go outside before I go to bed, and I think I just went outside on my deck briefly, and because it's so cold, the doors that I have in the house, they have this nice seal where you close the door and you got to pull it up. But I think I didn't do the pull up. So the door in my area of the house actually blew open in the middle of the night.
Uh,
And so I woke up and my bedroom was still kind of warm, but like then the area right outside my bedroom was like below freezing. So that kind of like set things off in the house. So I basically kind of spent the morning uh, reconciling or dealing with the issue, which I guess you could call it a short arc of karma, right? Because it's like I didn't check the door, so now I got to deal with it. You know what I mean?
yes.
Um, so yeah, so
Well, I
I didn't have much of a practice this morning. I just kind of like moved my joints around as I was doing things.
understood. I hear you. And there's still time in the day, isn't there? I,
Exactly, yeah.
I'm curious what brought you to Bozeman. Are you originally from there, or what was
No,
the?
I'm an East Coaster. I grew up in New York and Connecticut, and went to college in Los Angeles. Then I lived in France, on and off for 15 years when I was running the Flex Yoga Retreat Center there. So I first went to Bozeman in 2012. I got invited here to teach workshops. I was like, at that time, I was like, I think maybe I could live here one day. And then when COVID hit, it very much expedited my exit from France. And so I had been back to Bozeman almost every year for ongoing, for workshops since that first one. And it was actually the second to last place that I stopped to teach on my teaching tour just prior to COVID. Um, and what I wanted to recreate in the US was a situation where I lived at the place where I brought people for retreats and trainings and events. And I wanted a place that, gave me access to things that I love to do, like be outside and be in nature, but also, still like a town with an airport and some restaurants and, social life and whatnot. and where I could create a retreat center. And Bozeman just checked a lot of those boxes. And over the years, I developed a small group of really cool friends here that I love. So it kind of made sense.
Very cool.
And yeah.
Amazing. How far away out are you from opening up your retreat center? You made mention a little bit about the challenges with permits, and then so what
Yeah, it
stage
remains
is
to
it?
be seen, really. Right now I'm in this process where I've adjusted what would be my reapplication. My application caused a lot of consternation in the neighborhood. And so I'm in the process of some neighborhood outreach to hopefully help people understand how I won't disrupt them. And, so the timeline right now is I've been hosting these neighborhood roundtables, everything's just always worked better when you can speak to people face to face. And my hope is to reapply in the next couple months, or maybe as soon as the end of this month, and then be back in front of the county planning commission like sometime in February. At the same time, I'm planning other events elsewhere, because it's like you gotta eat, Um,
Yes.
and I just launched an online school, which is great. And I'm really excited about it. We actually have the first class tomorrow. During COVID, I did this sort of like endless run of like these 30-hour online trainings that were great during that phase because people had a lot more free time. So what I've done is sort of condense the curriculum, and it's now a monthly membership. So I'm not so interested in like, this month is backbend month and this month is handstand month, and by the end of the month you'll have perfected everything. It's like I'm really more at the angle right now where it's like I just want to have a community and we practice together, and over the course of a year nice things happen. And then if people want to train specific skills or they want like additional personalized programming, that's where we can really hone in. But this is kind of like I look at this online school as the bedrock of everything else that someone wants to do, right? So it's like if someone is looking just to get their weekly yoga and mobility practice, I also send people a monthly morning routine, and there's a mobility focus every month. And so it can be like all you do from the yoga mobility perspective and give you time to go do other things. Or some students are like they're gung ho hardcore, and like they're gonna do those 2 classes with me a week. They're gonna do their morning routine. They're gonna do their mobility focus, and then after yoga, they might do their hand balance practice, or they might they do a bunch of other stuff too. So it's I'm really excited about it, and I'm really excited to reconnect with everybody because we did build a really cool online community during that time, and I just it's like kind of the world reopened, and I was like, oh, everything maybe it's going to be back to normal, and then I realized a couple of things, and I was just sort of hemming and hawing. I knew I wanted to go back to the online thing because I just missed the ongoing connection with people all over the world, and I think it's a really cool thing because it gives people from all over a way to connect with each other, and also, like with me, and I get to connect with them, because not everybody can show up to a retreat or a training, for all kinds of different reasons.
I agree
So,
with you. I think it's so cool to see how this is evolving in relation to like what you said, like with the absolute need to do online, then that retreat
mhm,
from online, because it was so great to get back with
totally.
everybody, and now realizing
Yeah.
actually both are really cool to have
Hmm.
the opportunity to both. So I can find that on benjaminsears.life website, correct?
Exactly. Yeah.
Very cool.
BenjaminSears.life. And then there's a big thing to click on the online program. And I've got 70 people in there, and I launched it a month ago. So I'm really like grateful about that. And I was talking to a friend and who kind of helps me organize some of these things. And she was like, yeah, man, it's a credit to you. Like it means that you've been showing up, for a long time, because all those 70 people, like social media is just not that helpful anymore. I continue to do it because I don't know, out of habit or just obsession or whatever. But I think of those 70 people, 65 are people that were part of my previous online courses. And one of the things I like about it the most is there's some people I'll never meet in person, but like we're still connected, right? And then there's other people that like meet each other through online. And then there's other people that practice online. Um, that have done multiple events with me, and it's a way for them to stay connected. And then there's other people who have never been to an event, but one day they're going to show up, and it's going to be so cool when we finally meet in person, right?
Yes.
So there's all those angles.
That's so cool. I was watching some of the weather on the news this morning, and they were talking about this big storm coming through, which you're probably
Mm,
experiencing right now. And they were, like, everybody stay inside.
mm,
Just because, if it's bad weather and you're traveling, you're sliding off the road and making someone have to come and
yeah,
pull you out. It's a lot of work for everybody. So I was just thinking, like, it just another testament to how awesome the online element is for all
totally.
these different things, not just a pandemic, but weather, and which does, I don't want to go down a dark path, but make me think, like, how interesting if, like, the world got so hard to be in that you have to stay in
Every,
your
everybody's
little
in a bunker
your little box.
on
Yeah.
Zoom. Yeah.
But let's not go
Yeah. I mean,
there.
I think it
Let's not
brings
go
up a point too. What you're pointing at is like freedom. And, the same things that bring you freedom can put you in a prison, right? So it's like the internet and the access to online. It can be an incredible way to access information and connect and practice, or it can be a total time drain that inhibits people's ability to be healthy and happy.
Yeah.
And so it's like, man, I think in times past, in some ways, it was easier to be disciplined because there was less choice, right? It's like you got to get up and make a fire. You know what I mean? You got to go get more wood. You got to take care of the animals. You got to like. There's just no, and then you come in at the end of the day and you're just exhausted, so you go to bed. It's like I don't think people had insomnia. You know what I mean?
There's no.
Like, right? It was just too fucking tired. Unless you were like just prepping for a battle the next day, or I don't know, some overlord stole your wife or some terrible thing, right? But like, now it's like this crisis of choice, and so it's just so important how we organize
Yeah.
our time,
Well said.
and also, practice can give you great freedom, and I think that's why, uh, you know it's so important to appreciate all of the different ways to practice. Like going to class in a community is wonderful. Having the ability to practice on your own is wonderful. It's all great. It's just like, do you have the right tool for the occasion? For me, most of my practice is solitary, you know. Uh, Practicing in a studio is largely, it's like I think about it like eating. One of the simplest things people can do to be healthier is just cook more, you know? And there's eating for nourishment and there's eating for recreation. And they do overlap to some degree, but it's the same with practice. It's like there's practice for nourishment and your core practice, the things that you're working on. And there's practice for recreation when I go take my friend's class in town. And I'm just like, I'm really like, I'm not there to it's not like I don't even care what he's doing in the class. I used to like, man, there was a time I'd go to class and get so irritated at what it was or what it wasn't or whatever. And it's like you have to you have to recognize that you put yourself in the situation and chose to be there. And if I it's like that's the thing, I think people have to understand also about going to do different practices. It's like you're going to do Bikram yoga, just do Bikram yoga and don't be so upset that that's what you're asked to do. If you're going to a traditional Ashtanga studio, like that's a thing. Like you just, that's the thing, that's the thing there. Like the worst restaurant is the one that offers you sushi and pizza. You know what I mean? It's like, what the fuck, right? Like, let's just do, um, and then there's also amazing studios that integrate different elements together and pull it off. And I don't believe, here's the thing, I don't believe that everything has to be kept so pure in order to be impactful. I just believe that as practitioners and visitors in other spaces, we do have some degree of a responsibility to respect the parameters in place in those spaces when we visit them. Of course, with the caveat that, like, if someone is trying to tell you to do something that's going to hurt you or whatever, it's like, that's, you have the autonomy to self-regulate.
Oh man. Man, you have a great motivational vibe, Benjamin. I
Oh,
really
thanks.
I've really
Appreciate
enjoyed
that.
I really enjoy listening to you. I've thoroughly enjoyed hearing everything you have to say. I really hope to get a chance to meet you. I've never been to Montana, and I it's probably a bit of a joke that when the Yellowstone series came out, that
Yeah.
it's like everybody moved there.
Hmm.
And then, like you said, with COVID and everything else, but I really want to go. It looks so beautiful from the scenery, from
It's
the video element of the scenery. It looks spectacular.
it's majestic here. Yeah, it's really special.
Is there, in the essence or effort of maintaining my appreciation for you spending a whole hour with us here, is there anything that you would like to add to this wonderful selection of ideas you've given me, given
Well, that
us?
was a good alley-oop to tell you what I've got going on coming up,
Please,
so I appreciate
please.
that. Yeah, I mean the thing that I have now perpetually running is the online school, and so the way that that works is there are two live practices a week. One is a 75-minute yoga practice, Ben yoga, and one is a 60-minute mobility practice. So the mobility practice is really like just getting under the hood and making sure all the connections are well sealed. So, and then people get delivered a monthly mobility snack, which is like a 10-minute focus on a very one specific thing. So this month we're working on lumbar flexion, right? Like rounding the lower spine actively, which is, I think, a really important thing that oftentimes gets a little bit ignored because if you can round the spine under load, you're much safer in a lot of scenarios. Um, and it just makes space down there. So it's ironically that it makes you better at backbending, even though you're not backbending. And then the other, what else do I have going on? So I have a retreat in Ibiza, Spain, coming up in the spring. That I'm gonna launch publicly soon. I always give the people who came to the last event a chance to book first, and they've taken up almost all the spots. And then I have workshops this spring. I'll be in New Mexico. I'll be in Los Angeles. I'll be in Dallas. And then I'll be in Europe for Paris and then Ibiza. And then this summer, hopefully by the end of the summer, I'll have stuff running again at Bozeman House, which is my space. But I'm also doing two retreats out at a 10,000 acre ranch in Paradise Valley, which is the area where Yellowstone is supposed to be, the show. um, and it's just a majestic spot. So I'm doing one retreat that's a collaboration with my handstand coach, who's a guy called Virgile, who's an old school French handstand coach. He was a director of Cirque du Soleil. Like his resume is just insane. So we bring yoga and mobility and handstanding together. It's really fun. We also
Cool.
have a nice banter between us. I enjoy hanging out with him. And then the second retreat I'll do is one of my favorites. I do it every year. It's called Yoga Your Mom Can Do, and it's geared towards a bit of an older crowd. And my mom comes every year. Usually, like a bunch of her friends come, and it just I started that one because years ago, my mom started coming on my retreats in France, and she's a blast to have around. And then, like, more of her friends started coming. And then it got to the point where I was like, okay, it's a little hard to do like Gen Pop, because like people should like all of a sudden there's like some 25-year-old yogini who like wants to like sit on her own head, you know what I mean? And I'm teaching like, and then the rest of the room, like half of the room is like 70 years old. So I want to, and I'm pretty good at kind of like, you know, adjusting on the fly to whoever's there. But it's
Yeah.
really nice also to be able to have this group
Yeah.
of people, because one of the things that's so cool about that older group is that um, while they might be a little initially uncomfortable or unsure in the practice space, you get them around like the dining table, and it's just like
Yes.
it's like the gloves are off. It's great. Yeah,
That's so awesome.
yeah.
That's cool, man. What a great mix. Dude,
Thanks.
you're going off. You're going
I'm
off.
trying,
You
man.
got a lot
Honestly,
going.
I mean,
Yeah.
it's the front facing optimism must be maintained, but it's actually been a really hard year on a lot of fronts. So I appreciate the positive feedback.
I understand. Yeah, man. It's all in one big soup, isn't it? I mean, it's not.
Sure is.
I know, man. Dude, well, this has been incredible. Super thankful to Carrie Pearl for introducing me to you and opening the doorway to making this podcast happen. And I look forward to being in touch with you, traveling to visit and practice. And this has just been a real treat. Thank you so much, Benjamin.
It's been great for me too, man. I really appreciate the time and thanks for inviting me on. Look forward to connecting further.
Thank you.